Well, good morning, everybody. Delighted to be here. I suppose I really have to start with stating the obvious, which is what a time. What an incredible time. British politics, European politics, international politics. So it's really been quite a challenge putting together an overview of where we are with respect to Brexit. And I hope that you will forgive the line that I've taken. What I've decided to do is provide you with basically a timeline, beginning with the launch of the negotiations to where we are today, highlighting some of the key milestones, and also drawing attention to what we might expect, but then who knows, what we might expect in the months ahead. Okay, so let's, the first of my presentation. We're going to begin here on the 29th of March 2017. So this is when the UK formally notified the European Union of its intention to withdraw from the European Union. And this opened a 2-year window within which the UK and the European Union were to negotiate the orderly withdrawal of the UK from the European Union. Then would see the UK exit the EU on the 29th of March 2019 to, as the UK government are hoping for, a deep and special partnership between the UK and the European Union, with a potential period of transition from the relationship that the UK and the European Union enjoy now to that future relationship. So, keeping in mind that there are 2 sets of negotiations, and we're focusing today on those Article 50 negotiations, which will result, all being well, in the Withdrawal Agreement. Now, the Withdrawal Agreement is going to make reference to the future relationship between the EU and the UK. However, the details of that future relationship will actually be kind of got down into following the UK's exit from the European Union. So first things first, those Article 50 negotiations and the orderly withdrawal of the UK from the EU. Now, there are 3 key substantive issues that have to be addressed as part of this withdrawal agreement. They are citizens' rights, so the rights of the EU 27 citizens in the UK post-Brexit, and the rights of UK citizens in the EU 27 post-Brexit. The financial settlement, so this is the money, the financial obligation the UK has to the European Union upon withdrawal. And also, finally, is the question of that border on the island of Ireland, which will be the EU's external border. So these were identified as the 3 big issues that needed to be addressed as part of those withdrawal agreements. And we had a key milestone that was reached on the 8th of December last year, and this was a joint report written by the UK government and the European negotiators, where they set down the progress that had been made with respect to these 3 key issues. And for those of you who attended our event back in December, we actually addressed each of these in turn. But giving you a very broad brushstroke overview with respect to citizens' rights and with respect to the financial settlement, certainly there had been some substantive progress. So progress made on that withdrawal agreement. Where there were still big question marks, where there was the biggest fudge, where the can was certainly kicked down the road, was with respect to that border on the island of Ireland. However, in that joint report that was released on the 8th of December, it was agreed that sufficient progress had been made to allow negotiations to move on to thinking about that future relationship between the UK and the EU, which would also hopefully help those conversations that are taking place around the future of the border on the island of Ireland. So when we moved past solely focusing on those phase 1 issues and the debate opened up, there have been 3 other issues that have kind of been the focus of attention, and you will have heard a lot about these over the previous months. The first is the transition period. The second is the Northern Ireland backstop. And the third is the political declaration on the future relationship between the UK and the EU. And these all have to be part of this kind of package that comes with the withdrawal agreement. And they're all really important, and I'm going to go through each of them in turn. So, to begin with the transition period, and this is where we have seen some further progress in the negotiations. So, at the beginning of the year, there were positions that were presented by the European Union with respect to what that transition period should look like. So this is from the UK as a full member state of the European Union to that future relationship. Now, obviously, we know that when you transition, or as the UK government like to talk about, an implementation phase, it's very helpful if you know what your landing zone is, what you're implementing, what you're transitioning to. However, there are big question marks here. But notwithstanding this, we do have an agreement on what that transition phase will look like. So as proposed by the European Union, the transition will last up until the 31st of December 2020. So remember, the UK leaves the European Union in March 2019. So it will take us from March 2019 up to the end of 2020. It will see the UK having to fully comply with the EU acquis communautaire. And that means fully the laws, the policies, the norms of the European Union, including the implementation of EU law that comes into effect during that transition period. So this will see the UK continue participation in the single market, continue participation in the customs union, and of course, through participation in the single market, freedom of movement will continue. Now, the big change is going to be the UK comes out of the political institutions of the European Union. So that means no MEPs, no UK commissioner, no representation on the council. Here in Wales, we know there will be no representation on the Committee of the Regions. Also, we can think about the European Economic and Social Committee and also other bodies of the European Union, including EU agencies. So the UK representatives comes out of that political decision-making infrastructure. Now, you probably remember earlier on this year, there was a great political uproar when these proposals were released, because a number of UK politicians said it was absolutely outrageous and out of the question that the UK would continue to abide by freedom of movement, so we would continue to have EU27 citizens arriving in the UK during that period, and also that we would be outside of that political decision-making infrastructure. However, when the dust settled, when everything calmed, the UK government very quietly agreed to the proposals that be presented by the European Union, and these have now been integrated within that draft withdrawal agreement. Now, the second big thing that has been the focus of political and public attention since we've moved beyond those phase one actually recalls a key phase one issue, and that is the nature of the border on the island of Ireland. Now, this is a really interesting, it's a very important topic, but it's interesting because it's the area really where we've had principled agreement between the UK government and the European Union about what winning looks like. And winning looks like maintaining a soft border on the island of Ireland. However, how that is to be put into effect in practical terms, there are still big question marks about this. Now, we've heard talk about this Northern Ireland backstop, and this is because of something that was inserted in one of the paragraphs of that joint report in December. And that was that the UK government was committing to providing specific solutions in order to make sure that regardless of what that future relationship was like between the UK and the European Union, we would ensure the soft border on the island of Ireland. So this is being termed as the Northern Ireland backstop. Now, the UK government doesn't want this Northern Ireland backstop. What it wants to be able to do is to have the whole of the UK through the relationship with the European Union, that being sufficient to ensure a soft border on the island of Ireland. However, the European Union has become increasingly concerned about the final landing zone post-Brexit, and has now insisted that we do need to have this backstop, a Northern Ireland backstop clause written within the withdrawal agreement. Now, there's been much political contestation about this, which you will have heard about, particularly May, June time. But it resulted in June with the UK government presenting a technical note on a temporary customs arrangement. And this is what is being discussed at the moment. Now, the key features of this temporary customs arrangement, and this is what is really being challenged by the European Union, is this temporary customs arrangement, which is the backstop, is time limited, and also it is UK-wide. And the European Union is contesting both of these things. It's saying that really, for a backstop, this cannot be time limited. We need to ensure a permanent backstop position. And also, this cannot be UK-wide. This is specifically about the border on the island of Ireland. So we're going to hear a lot more about this Northern Ireland backstop, particularly as the European Union become increasingly concerned about the confusion in the UK about that final landing zone. And this is what we're going to turn to now. So this is the future relationship between the UK and the European Union. So following the joint report at the end of December, this sanctioned the opening up of discussions about what that future relationship was going to look like. And we had the opening gambit from the European Council in March, and this really reiterated the principles that were to guide the establishment of this EU-UK relationship. So essentially that the European Union is going to protect the integrity of the single market. Those 4 freedoms are indivisible. There will be no cherry picking by the UK. We know as well the European Union has been very insistent that it's not looking for a complicated bespoke arrangement with the UK. It wants a model that already exists as part of the models, the arrangements that it has with third countries. And also it wants to ensure a level playing field between the European Union and the UK. And this principle is really, really important to ensure that the UK can't undercut the European Union in terms of financial, social, fiscal dumping. So these are the kind of guiding principles. Now, we come on to really the big question here in terms of that future relationship between the UK and the European Union is, what does the UK government want? And this really for previous months has been the million-dollar question. And so thinking about it from the Brussels side, they've been eagerly waiting for let's say, a comprehensive or a thoughtful statement from the UK that they can work with as part of the negotiations to work towards that future relationship between the UK and the European Union. Now, this is where I say I'm not going to get bogged down into kind of the political wranglings that have been going on within the UK government, particularly within the Conservative Party, but not solely within the Conservative Party, that have really been taking place around what that future relationship looks like. But I'm going to give you some kind of, I think, for me, the 2 key points, which is about red lines and it's about trade-offs. So from the very early days, Theresa May has been very clear about what her red lines are with respect to that future relationship between the UK and the European Union. So we will see an end to the freedom of movement. We'll be leaving the single market. Contributions to the EU budget will end, and the UK will be outside the jurisdiction of the Court of Justice of the UK. Now, by sticking to those red lines, that reduces the number of models, the number of potential future relationships that the UK and the European Union can have, and therefore there are economic trade-offs. In order to reduce the economic impact, then there will have to be those political trade-offs. And what we're failing to have in the UK at the moment is a very honest, open discussion about what those economic trade-offs are and also what those political trade-offs are. And I'm not going to get down into the depths of this now. We can perhaps unpick it a little bit more in the questions, but I wanted to present to you, this is really the kind of the rock and the hard place, if you like. But what we have had recently, we have had from the UK government a white paper on the future relationship between the UK and the European Union. Now, the extent to which this remains a credible contribution to discussions is obviously open to question. If for any of you who have been following what's been going on in the House of Commons over previous days, we realise that this white paper has come under fierce attack. However, viewed in the context of the negotiations, we can see that this at least is a starting point, a document that's been presented for the European Union and can be used as the basis for negotiations. So I'm going to run very briefly through the contents of the white paper. So essentially what it's presenting is the UK continuing to participate in a single market for goods, and this is being kind of paraphrased as a common rule book for goods, and therefore the UK will continue to participate in a number of EU agencies to facilitate that. There is, I think, a wonderfully complicated, facilitated customs arrangement to ensure the frictionless flow of goods between the UK and the EU. Also, the white paper deals with security cooperation and continues the UK's participation in a number of EU agencies, so Europol and Eurojust. The UK government foresees the UK continuing to participate within those agencies, and there are a number of other cross-cutting matters. And also, I think it's worth mentioning what the UK paper does not deal with, and it doesn't really deal comprehensively with what happens with respect to migration post-Brexit. Now, we can spend a bit of time pulling this to pieces. However, I think what is useful at this point is to note that this is a starting point for the negotiations between the UK and the European Union that will go on. Potentially, we'll see these going on during the summer. And obviously, we'll have to square this with actually what's left of the white paper, the UK side. So we see with the negotiations up to now that we've hit a number of key milestones. We've had that joint report. There's an agreement on transition. We've got the key issues of the backstop and that future relationship between the UK and the European Union. So that is what is ahead of us. But before I leave, I just wanted to spend a moment thinking about this very briefly from the EU side of things. So for the European Union, Brexit is, it's a key milestone in European integration story. And let's go back to the 24th of June 2016 and kind of pause over in Europe, pause over in Brussels. And this was really a very emotional moment and has been an emotional time for the European Union as well. It has accepted but does not welcome the referendum result, acknowledges that as an EU 27, so without the UK, it will be politically and economically, geopolitically weaker than it would otherwise be. However, they have regrouped as a European Union of 27, are really fiercely pursuing an agenda, a post-Brexit agenda. So what is the European Union going to look like as an EU of 27? And for those of us who have been following European politics for a while now, what has been extraordinary is the unprecedented unity we've seen between those EU 27 member states with respect to Brexit. Around Brexit, there's been the regular kind of contestation and fallings out, etc. However, with respect to the negotiations, there has been a very strong unity and really clear red lines from the European Union side. Now, since the referendum and the launching of the Article 50 process, I think it's fair to say, if I have to provide a very kind of brief overview, that there has been increased frustration from the European side as the UK has been really hampered by internal politics. There has been exasperation at times. And I think it's fair to say now that on the European side that really there is a lot of concern. There is real concern now that the UK government is not going to be able to deliver on Brexit. And that does not mean that the UK remains within the European Union. It means that we might not necessarily see the orderly withdrawal that I think everybody really wants to see. And something we see increasingly from European spokespeople, and this is a message that comes from the European Council, so this is the highest political authority of the European Union, where the heads of state and government meet. And increasingly we see this, and I'll take this from the European Council conclusions from their last summit meeting. So the European Council renews its calls upon member states, union institutions and all stakeholders to step up their work on preparedness at all levels and for all outcomes. Now, we hear this within the UK, and I think often this has got kind of a political edge to it. Now, when it is being said at a European level, this is not This is not being said politically. This is being said because I feel that now there is a genuine concern amongst the EU institutions, amongst the EU member states, that the road ahead is a very bumpy one, and there is a lot to be done in a short period of time, and there are real concerns over whether this can actually be delivered. And my final slide, I also think it's important that we acknowledge that for the European Union, Brexit is not at the top of the EU's agenda. So if you go to Brussels, we are not the talk of the town. We are not being talked about in the coffee shops. They are talking about Trump and the extent to which Trump has now unsettled international trade has really challenging the international security agenda, concerns about the health of the Eurozone, ongoing challenges around migration, the new trade agreement that's just been signed with Japan, ongoing trade negotiations with New Zealand and Australia, the future of the European Union as an EU 27. So Brexit is really not featuring, certainly not in the same way that it was. So finally, time is marching on. The deadline for all of this is the 29th of March 2019. This is when the UK formally leaves the European Union. We really need to see a withdrawal agreement in place by October 2018, so it can be agreed, the UK side and the EU side. We're hearing increasingly that the UK saying, well, this can be pushed back till December, but this really leaves very, very little time for the agreement to be approved. So we have come a certain way, but we have a huge amount to do in a very short period of time. And on that cheery note, I will leave you. Okay, thank you.